Okay, good evening and welcome to the latest version of Building the Scottish State Show with myself, Dr. Mark McNaught, here on the 24th of March, 2022. And I have the great pleasure of introducing to you Sara Salyers, who recently has written a series of articles that was published in Ian Lawson's blog, Yours for Scotland, regarding the claim of right. And the ability of Scots essentially to exert the claim of right in order to basically withdraw from the Treaty of Union and become independent. And so we'll be talking about that and other issues related to the Constitution and other things as well. So first of all, thank you so much, Sara, for being with us this evening.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Yeah, I just wanted to start off. I don't know if you saw that today, but Prince William was in Jamaica today, and I think the Prime Minister, thanked him for visiting and basically said, "We're going to become an independent. We're going to become an independent republic as soon as you get out of here." So, I mean, that has to be the first time in history that a monarch has been told to his, or a future monarch has been told to his face that we're leaving the kingdom. So I found that most inspiring, and especially for Scotland. If Jamaica can do it, certainly Scotland could do it. So I wanted to begin by that. But so let's begin by your research that you did into the claim of right and what your experience was in developing the articles that you did for Yours for Scotland.
Well, I didn't actually develop them for Yours for Scotland. I developed them for the independence movement, really. Mm-hmm. But Ian Lawson, when he got his review copy, said he would like to publish it, and I'm thrilled. I was very grateful, and he did, and it got quite a big response. So,
Okay.
I think we're up and running.
Okay, and what's the gist of it? And if you can, if it, because I'd heard of the claim of right of 1689, right? But I'd never seen a copy of it. I don't know if I remember doing an actual search, but is it a document that's widely available, or is it?
Well, you can download the text of it. You can find that online and download it. The actual document itself is preserved with the other records, historic records of Scotland, somewhere in Edinburgh. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because what happened was that in 16, can I back up a bit? We're talking about, for most people, this sounds like ancient history. We're going back to 1689, and in a treaty that's signed in 1706 in England and 7 in Scotland, and it's like this is ancient past. It's got no relevance. But actually, what people haven't, and I hadn't realized, is that when you look clearly at the whole independence argument and what we're talking about, you're talking about something that is a constitutional matter. It's a matter of constitutional law. The union is a constitutional arrangement, and it's about changing that constitutional arrangement and how you do it. And at the heart of that, there's basically a contract. We have a treaty, which is basically a contract between two sovereign states and sovereign nations, and then they become one new state. The nations remain and remain sovereign, but the state is now the United Kingdom of Great Britain. The question is what the contract says, and I did not realize that for years, and then. As I began looking at the arguments that said that, basically Parliament is supposed to be sovereign in Scotland and England, and Parliament became sovereign instead of the monarch in 1689 because of something called the Bill of Rights. But we didn't have a union then. So right across the legal profession, Scotland and England, and at the top levels, it's accepted that the Parliament of the UK is sovereign in Scotland as well as in England. So and that's very serious for Scotland. I mean, it's serious in terms of the kind of accountability people can expect from their government. It's serious in terms of what the government can and can't do. And it's serious in terms of how we end our, this union, if that's what we choose to do. because it basically means that and Parliament claims that it has authority over the conditions of the treaty. So that puts the ball back in the Constitutional Court. It means we have to look at what the contract says and what were the terms. Like any contract, you look at what the terms are when you enter it, and some of those will change, like the how much you're allowed to charge for beer and the price of salt and so on. That's, that's not going to be the same for 300 years. Some of them don't, and the things that don't change are constitutional principles. So we're looking at a situation in which the most recent argument being made is that, and this is not interesting for most people, but it's absolutely crucial. There's an argument that is made that the Treaty of Union was something called an incorporating union. What that means is that when Scotland signed the Treaty of Union, Scotland became part of England. Mm-hmm. That's not what happened, but that's how it's now being presented. And that's what happens when you have a colonizer, a superior power. It just changes the rules of the game all the time. Mm-hmm. So if that's true, and that's kind of got traction and gets acceptance at pretty high levels, Scotland just became part of England. If that's true, we're not getting out of this union this side of hell. Mm-hmm. But if it's not true, then there might be other avenues. Mm-hmm. And it turns out it's not true. So and then we're up against this. We come back to, but this is 300 years ago. And so what I want people to understand is we're in a contract here. It's a constitutional contract. There were terms and conditions, and they've been breached. I mean, really very, very badly breached. And we're being told, as the lesser entity, in fact, just a region, that any decisions that are made about our constitutional future will be made by a parliament that is dominated 10-1 by non-Scottish MPs. Mm-hmm. So if we have a constitutional claim, then we need to know it, and we need to make it, because it's the only way we're getting out. Okay.
All right. And what did you discover did you see did you look at an original copy of the claim of right, or
you can't get hold of an original copy or even a photocopy of it, as far as I can tell, but you can get the text. But what is really interesting, what is most interesting, is the text of the Articles of Union, because the thing that I had missed, I'd read them many times, but I had missed the preamble that talks about the ratification. These acts of union are actually acts of ratification. They ratify a treaty. Mm-hmm. And they make it very clear that the condition of the treaty and the union is the incorporation of a Scottish Act passed in 1706 for the preservation of the Presbyterian faith. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't just that. I mean, England had, the Church of England. Scotland had the Kirk, Presbyterianism. It was very keen to keep its own religion, but it was also very keen to keep its own form of its own laws. Our judicial system was different, its own character and its own constitution. So as a condition of the treaty and the union, the Claim of Right Act, which was passed in 1689, was inserted along with a number of other kind of religious acts. And the Claim of Right Act, which was passed at the same time as the Bill of Rights, was passed in order, like the Bill of Rights, to remove a monarch that was no longer wanted, James VII and II. And both the Bill of Rights and the Claim of Rights talked about the way that he behaved as a despotic king and he was arbitrary. But the Claim of Right is different. The Claim of Right says that Scotland has a fundamental constitution. And that constitution limits the monarchy, which is also the government, because Parliament and King were the government. That it is legally limited, that there are things that it cannot do, and among the things, and then it lists grievances, among the things that this monarch and his government did, and then it gives these civil rights, which include the right to protest, the right to appeal to the Parliament, and actually also the Court of Session, the right of fair taxes, and you couldn't give your friends off their taxes, you couldn't give your friends money, without parliamentary oversight. I mean, lots and lots of things that apply today.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, a whole pile of civil rights that having violated these, the government was forfeit. So it's establishing that we have a constitution. It establishes that there's this fundamental constitution limits the government. It says the things that the government may not do, quite a number of them,
Mm-hmm.
that still apply today. And it's not passed by a parliament. That's very important. It's passed by another body that developed separately from the parliament called the Convention of the Estates.
Mm-hmm.
And that therefore means, and that body describes itself as the full and free expression of the nation. It doesn't pretend to be the parliament, it's the full and free expression of the nation. And it talks about how now it's defending the rights and liberties of the people of Scotland as our ancestors have done in the past. This is very, very important. It's establishing that a body representing the people of Scotland, to which people are elected, as well as the usual suspects from the nobility and the clergy and so on, but that as an expression of the nation itself, not the parliament, it has right to boot out the government, because the government has become tyrannical. It's behaved as if it's not limited, that it could get rid of any laws it wanted, and it's violated civil rights and liberties.
Mm-hmm.
That document was ratified as a condition of the Union.
Mm-hmm.
Then we're told Scotland was subsumed into it was a
Extinguished.
incorporating union. So when you go online and you look online and you look up, the UK's unwritten constitution, you go to the British Library, you'll find a wonderful article that goes all the way from Magna Carta to the Bill of Rights and beyond. Everything it's talking about is English constitutional law and constitutional position, and there's not a single mention of any of the Scottish constitutional documents. Mm-hmm. And yet you go back to the treaty, and this was negotiated by Queen Anne through commissioners, two nations coming together to form a state. Scotland's Declaration of Arbroath and the Act of Salvo, which I've talked to you about in the past, and the Claim of Right, are radically more democratic than anything that exists in England, and they're not to be found. Mm-hmm. So we're given a constitutional history that is England's constitutional history, and now we're part of that. We don't have one, but we do. And the negotiators at the time of the Act of Union were very clear. Scotland wanted to preserve its constitutional, religious, and judicial character. And so the Claim of Right was ratified as a condition of the Union. Falls the Claim of Right, falls the Union. Mm-hmm. End of. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's important. That's why this isn't ancient. Nobody nobody makes any claim that Magna Carta has no possible bearing on today's law. No, they hold it up, and it in many ways is an awful document. The Bill of Rights contains all kinds of anti-Catholic.
I know, and I was reading also in the claim, using the word papist for popery.
Oh yeah,
all the time. Yeah,
yeah. So nobody this is this kind of dislocated thinking that happens when you have colonization. We're all, everyone's terribly proud of Magna Carta and proud of the Bill of Rights, and it's applied to this day, and it's brought to bear on cases, modern cases. Mm-hmm. And nobody pretends it's an anachronistic document, despite the fact that a lot of its provisions are anachronistic. So, mm-hmm. The Bill of Rights said no Catholic could be an MP.
Yeah,
that's obviously anachronistic. But what people look at are the constitutional principles
Jacob Rees-Mogg
on which these actions are taken.
So I was just saying Jacob Rees-Mogg could not be an
why
MP.
Did they get rid of that?
Yeah, maybe
we should go back to the anachronisms. Yeah, but when we talk about the Claim of Right, people say, "Oh, well, come on, it's all anti-Catholic and it's all this and it's all that." Nobody would dream of saying that about Magna Carta and that it's anti-Semitic, which it is, or the Bill of Rights. But when it comes to the Scottish constitutional document, we're not talking about suddenly we're not talking about constitutional principle anymore. Mm. Yeah. But it's got to be consistent. I'm about to have some about to have some people walk through here. So if there's a bit of noise, excuse me.
Okay.
I can't do anything about it.
No problem.
Yep, here we go. Just give me a sec. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. Tell me a little bit more about the adoption of the treaty and acts of union. As far as I understand, there was the Darian Scheme, which was one of the a Scottish attempt to create a colony in what's now, I believe, what is now Panama.
It's a long and painful history. Yeah. Well, there's been quite a lot written about it, but like most Scottish history, what's written can be frustrating. So basically, there was an act passed in England that prevented Scotland trading.
Right.
It was the Shipping Act. Various other things were done, I suspect, looking back, to force Scotland into a position where it would have to join the Union. There was this fear that because there was still, particularly in the Highlands, and they were much more populated, densely populated, percentage-wise than they are today, and the clans had enormous influence. And there's another thing, you won't read a lot about that. You won't, we sort of have the clans to one side as a sort of a romantic footnote to Scotland's history.
Yeah.
You can make a program like Outlander about, but they're not actually part of the development of Scotland's constitutional history and government and so on. They're somewhere off to the side, but they weren't. There was huge support among the clans for the Stuarts and the deposed Stuart king, and so that represented a threat to the Hanoverian interest and to England's interests, that there were these large numbers of people who might go off and fight for the Stuart cause, or indeed bring them back to British shores, and they did, of course. Bonnie Prince Charlie and so on. So there was a lot of fear about Scotland's position and a desire to pull Scotland in under England's influence and control, and so a number of things happened. We had a series of bad harvests. There had been the Shipping Act. Scotland was faring very badly. We didn't have a national debt, but we did have starvation and poverty and just horrible things happening. And the Glencoe massacre resulted in the Court of Session wanting, in fact, going all the way. There was talk of putting the king on trial, which is possible in Scotland, and horrified the English. And before it could get any further, there were quiet negotiations done, and Scotland was offered a colony in Panama. The short of the story is they supposedly were not properly organized, and they filled their ships up with things like wigs and went off to trade wigs in Panama. No, they filled up with what they could trade at each port where they stopped to revittle and refuel and so on. But the English arranged for them to be blockaded by the Spanish.
Yep.
And they limped into Panama, and the rest is history. And that virtually bankrupted Scotland. And there was a lot of nobility. It was the nobility that was bankrupt.
It wasn't the Scottish treasury. It was the nobility that had invested in the company. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Actually, the nobility invested heavily, but almost any Scot who had a bit of money put aside invested in it. Mm. Almost every Scot who had some money to invest invested in it. Okay. So, it really affected the majority of people in Scotland. Mm-hmm. And there were spies English spies found to have been part of it. And it's a hideous and horrible story. And one of the things was they were offered money to pay off the losses if they would agree to the Union.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now I've looked at the documents that David came out with, and it's the Acts of Union, and from what I understand, there was the Treaty of Union, and the Acts would ratify this treaty. Is there a copy of the absolute original? Say that. Sorry. Sorry, I was asking if there is.
Sorry, I'm losing you. So go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was asking if there is the text of the original treaty or just the acts of that ratified the treaty.
No, the treaty, the treaty, as you might know, the treaty, David Henry went to the bother of finding the original, the treaty,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and getting that published.
Mm-hmm.
But the acts just rehearse the articles of the treaty.
Mm-hmm.
They say themselves in the preamble. They talk about, you know, ratifying the treaty, this treaty. So, you know, a treaty doesn't come into existence until people sign off on it, and the acts of Union of England and Scotland were the ratifying acts of the treaty.
Mm-hmm.
Only now we're told that these acts replaced the treaty. There's no treaty in the history of treaties where
no. I mean, there are enabling acts to ratify the treaty, but that doesn't change the treaty at all. I mean, and
that's right.
And the idea that they can and you made some discoveries that they've actually changed the treaty over time, or you know, on the website
there was I started looking at the Acts of Union closely about 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then and I had copies on the computer and so on, and then I went back just to check something, and couldn't be bothered looking for the document on the computer, and went back to the parliamentary website to get it up, and discovered that Article 25, which had previously been very short, now contained the entire act that was referred to as a condition of the Treaty and of the Union. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, I don't know when it was inserted. You know, the preamble makes it clear that it's inserted as a condition of the Treaty and the Union. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and that's very easy to miss because the language is quite old. Mm-hmm. So it's there, whether it appears in fact or not, it's actually there as part of the ratification. It's not an article, however. You know, but it's put in as if it's one of the Articles of Union. And being suspicious, you know, I think it's put in as if it was, you know, in Article 25, so that Parliament can make the false claim that it has the right to change that along with any other Articles of Union, mm-hmm. which it doesn't. Mm-hmm. But anyway.
Yeah. And so how do you think this is actionable? I mean, what do you think that, you know, what needs to happen in order for Scotland to basically assert its sovereignty and you know, invoke the claim of right and withdraw from the treaty?
Well, this probably isn't what most people want to hear, but what I think is, we can't, when you're talking about constitutional law, you can demonstrate that the contract had a get-out clause, and that's basically what it was. There is a get-out clause in the Treaty of Union, mm-hmm. which is the provision of the claim of right in Scotland. But historically, and you know, in the real world, that hasn't had a lot of weight with those who have got what they want by treaty and then decided to ignore the treaty or pretend it says something else. So, you know, we shouldn't expect that. There are lots of reasons we should not expect to get justice and freedom from playing the game the way that the guys who've taken the ball want us to play the game. It's not mm-hmm. going to happen. However, Scots are very keen on justice, and they're very keen on following the law and you know, and sticking with what's lawful. And I would point back to the Declaration of Arbroath. You know, when that declaration was made and signed, you know, and there was the declaration of the clergy that went with it. It was a statement of the truth. You know, the truth was that Scotland was an independent nation, that the English king had no right to claim, you know, sovereignty over the Scottish people, that this was an oppressive and a tyrannical move, and that the people had the right to elect the king they had elected, and you know, and that he would lead them subject to fulfilling his oath, mm-hmm. and that they would do that for freedom. Now, that didn't persuade the Pope to change his mind. It didn't persuade European armies to come to Scotland's aid. it didn't do anything except strengthen the commitment and resolve of the Scots to do what was right.
Mm-hmm.
And they did it. Mm-hmm. And they won.
Okay.
Because that's what you need.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
It's very unlikely. You know, Westminster's not going to say, "Oh dear, you got it right. We did. Whoops, we've hidden your constitution. We've ignored it. Oh dear, we violated these conditions. You better go." Mm-hmm. You know, they're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. They're not going to give us a referendum that is properly constitutional. You know, Holyrood has a local authority franchise. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a constitutional referendum where the people who are passing through Scotland and have no stake should not be voting.
Yeah.
But they, you know, they put in place a referendum that had nothing to do with Scottish stakeholding, that was a crucial constitutional question. What tells you how seriously they took that referendum?
Yeah, because I live in France,
in other words, we're not going to get.
Oh, we're not going to get it from Westminster. Westminster's not going to, you know, give up Scotland easily, obviously. Can you hear me? Okay.
Repeat. I'm losing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Could you say that again?
Yes. I was just making the point that I live in France, and I'm still a UK citizen, and I'm able to live here. You know, now I have to use a carte de séjour. But when I was before Brexit, I was able to vote in the local elections and in European elections, but you know, I didn't vote. You know, I couldn't vote for the Assemblée Nationale or the presidency, and I don't expect to. I mean, I'm not a French citizen. You know, I mean, then in my view, that they should, the French people should have the right to do that, and that's the right to give me the franchise for European and local. But I understand that as I'm not a citizen. And of course, in the United States, it's obvious. My dad was a green card holder, and he was never able to vote. So in any election. So it's and I think that if there is, I don't know what type of referendum there would be. If there is one next year, I have no idea. It certainly won't be under a Section 30 order, as I understand it. They're planning to just plow ahead and pass the bill, the referendum bill, and just basically dare the UK to stop it. Gordon Ross on IndyCar had contacted Mike Russell, and that's basically what he said, that they would be plowing ahead with it. But I just don't see that as a wise course of action. I think that something more radical like what you're proposing should be done, or at least tried. I mean, I just don't understand why they're so, the politicians are so awesome.
What are we going to lose?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, we've got, the other thing is that look at this, look at what we're facing in the world today. Just how top down government has become, just how behind closed doors the decisions are that are being made that are affecting everybody, and that they have no say in. And 1 million people can take to the streets, and they have less influence than a corporate lobbyist, because there's no accountability.
Or Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look at who can. Look at how many companies control the media. The monopoly is extraordinary, and the narrative is always the same. And you cannot have democratic government without informed consent, and you can't have informed consent without information and consent, and we have neither. So the whole point about the claim of right is that if we were to begin to put it together, we will begin, and there is work going on now to start forming the assemblies. We were to begin producing a system, putting a system together which somewhat resembles a sort of modern version of a very ancient Scottish tradition, where you have this free flow of information, where people can get all of the facts from all sides, whether they like, you don't have to like what one side or the other is saying, but you have to hear it all.
Sure.
Where we can begin putting into place the kind of democracy that is fit for purpose, because we certainly don't have one right now. And what is amazing about Scotland's old traditions is that they contain the blueprint for exactly the kind of democracy that we need now. So if we are able to do that, and to begin to build a movement that results in the equivalent of the body that produced the Claim of Right, which was the Convention of the Estates, which means the Assembly of the Communities of Scotland, and which developed right through, down from the Guardians of the Realm, through something called the General Council, which then became the Convention of the States and developed separately from the Parliament, and therefore didn't join Westminster. It was something separate. It wasn't part of Parliament. It didn't become part of Westminster. So if we could begin to put that together, we would also be beginning to put together the kind of participatory democracy that's really absolutely essential now.
Oh, absolutely.
Where people really have a say. So I think it's very exciting, and and I think it's worth trying.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And let's see. And so, what do you, in your view, was there? I mean, democracies go up and down, and I've never believed that, that the UK was ever a true democracy. But was there a time when it was more democratic? Or was there kind of a golden age, if you will, of British democracy? Or, I mean, maybe post-war when there was the welfare state created, and the government for a couple decades actually enacted policies that helped people, like the National Health Service and this type of thing. Or just how do you view where is the UK on the kind of the democratic meter in terms of relative to its past, in your view?
I think we have to acknowledge that notions of Western notions of democracy have changed dramatically recently. If you want to look at real democracy, the kind that we the ideals of democracy, you have to go to the indigenous peoples. You have to go back to the Native Americans. If you want to see real democracy in action, that's where you need to go. Or, oddly enough, the clan system in Scotland, which gets no traction at all. There was, prior to the feudalization of the clan system, it was an incredibly democratic system because it was built on the notion of kinship and the bonds of affection and love and responsibility. And it was circular, with the sort of the chief in the middle. It wasn't hierarchical. Irish society was the same. We are looking at feudalism, Norman feudalism particularly, which spread across the world, beginning to become more democratic, and patting ourselves on the back for things like Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights, when indigenous peoples and the Celtic peoples included had that down long. They were way ahead then of where Western so-called democracy is now. I love that quote from Gandhi when he was asked after the British were pulling out of India. They were looking at what kind of government would suit India, and someone asked him what he thought of British democracy, and he said he thought it would be a very good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. So get a couple questions here. I didn't see the. Surely our elected politicians get together and dissolve or terminate the act of union. We no longer wish to be part of it. We in the SSRG, Scottish Sovereignty Research Group, have proposed that, and we actually sent letters to the party leaders in both Westminster and or the pro-independence party leaders in both Westminster and in Holyrood, and we got exactly one reaction from some bureaucratic underling saying, "Oh, there'll be a referendum soon, and we'll put out a prospectus beforehand." That's all they said. So, what do you think it would take to get them to actually do this? I mean, or are they so comfortable in Westminster and Holyrood under this current system that you don't feel that they would be able to operate, or that they would be able to actually do this?
I wish I had a crystal ball so I could answer that question. I think a lot of us wish we had a crystal ball and we could say, what the heck's going on here? But
Yeah.
But the truth is that the legal advice that we've seen from constitutional lawyers is that at the time of union, both the state of England and the state of, although sometimes they say just the state of Scotland, but the independent states were extinguished and a new state was created. And when people elect MPs to Westminster, they're electing them to represent them in the new state. They're not electing them as representatives of Scotland, but Scottish representatives in the UK. And that, I think, it's a consideration because most of our MPs, I think, would imagine going through legal routes and having it rubber stamped and so on. And I don't think that it would appeal to any of them to say, right, I'm not attending Westminster anymore. I won't get my salary. I'll go home and I'll wait until, till Westminster acknowledges our withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
So, there are a lot of constitutional arguments put forward. Holyrood can't do that because Holyrood was created by Westminster.
Yeah.
That, the clue is in the word devolved or devolution. That is Westminster's power devolved to the Scottish Parliament as a local authority, by the way.
Yeah. And
that means that Holyrood is answerable to Westminster. Now, under the claim of right, Westminster is answerable to the people of Scotland. That's what we have to make public. And really, I think it's when people turn around and say, right, so you're not actually allowed to do this. You're taking on the right to do something that you've never had, and we're not going to have it anymore. That's when we'll see something interesting start to happen. And that's the move, and sooner or later, if that movement grows, the politicians will get on board. Then we'll see things change.
Okay. Let's see. Let me get another one. Is the Declaration of Our Growth and the Bill of Rights relevant if the politicians don't use them?
The politicians use the Bill of Rights all the time. The courts use the Bill of Rights all the time. The English constitutional documents are in use every day. Parliamentary privilege comes from the Bill of Rights. That means you can't repeat what's said in Parliament. The right of Parliament to decide something against the wishes of the electorate comes from parliamentary sovereignty. That comes from the Bill of Rights, 1689, English bill. What they don't do is behave as if any of the Scottish constitutional documents even existed.
Yeah. Okay. The declarations, when signed, are being lodged at the United Nations in New York. The Treaty of Union is an international treaty and fails to be dealt with in an international court, not domestic court. So the idea that because you do have the law of the treaty, and so do you think this is something that's justiciable at an international court level? We've had varying opinions in our group, but what do you?
Two things. Well, first of all, UK is signatory to the Vienna Convention on treaties.
Yeah, the law of the treaties.
But they don't, they don't adjudicate things that are older than the Vienna Convention. They'll give guidance and they'll, point in the direction and so on, but they won't adjudicate. And you point me to one court or international body that has told a member state or another country, you have got to allow this region or and we are treated as a region to do what it wants to do. They just don't. They don't intervene. So by all means, and we could get a nice ruling and it would do absolutely nothing.
Okay. And let's see. And what's to stop us from having an emergency Holyrood election and our MSPs are elected to end the union? England wouldn't seek permission to leave if they would just go. I think, as I understood it, if the SNP had embraced Alba on the second list and they had a big enough majority, then they could have done that. But I think you need a super majority in Holyrood to call a new election. Is that correct, as far as you understand?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So they only have a bare. So the SNP does not have a majority in the. They have with the Greens. They do have a majority who has promised to, but they don't have is it 3/5? I can't remember exactly what it is, but there needs to be a significant supermajority in order to call for Holyrood to call a new election.
I think they need to have over 80%.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. They have to have over 80% in order to set aside the reserved powers to take on things that are otherwise reserved to Westminster.
Okay. All right. Let's see. So Sarah's saying we won't be given independence. How does she think we should use the claim of right to take independence? And you had talked about that earlier of forming kind of a modern version of the estates, but
we get together. We form assemblies. There's work being done that will be launched fairly soon that will provide people with identity cards so that they can, they can register themselves online when they're participating. These can turn into physical assemblies. We begin making sure people understand what Scotland's constitution says, that it is different from England's constitution, that government doesn't have the right to do whatever it wants to, and in spite of the people. What the complaints are, the grievances are, that just as in the first claim of right, that mean that this government is now illegitimate. We rehearse those. We get together. We draw people together. Think of the size of the movement that came together prior to that dreadful referendum. And I say dreadful because it was rigged from the start.
Of course,
franchise was rigged, and the way that they were allowed to break the Edinburgh Agreement, and just all of that stuff. So, but think of what happened, that outpouring. And right now we're looking at a fractured, wounded independence movement that has been very badly wounded from within. If there's anything that can bring us together, it's the notion that we ourselves can do this, that we ourselves can come together. We can not just come together to demand what our constitution says we have the right to, but the kind of government that puts the people at the center again. And that we don't have to wait. We don't go to Westminster and say, please. We do it ourselves, and we do it legally and carefully, and it can be done. And we work out how to do it as we go.
Yeah. Okay. And what are some of the main constitutional provisions that you would want to see in an independent Scotland? I mean, and because, I mean, and the thing is, in my view, I was, I've been, following, I got very interested in the referendum, despite living in France. I got very interested in the referendum as soon as there was announced that there would be one. And my first thought, when I heard, oh, there'll be a referendum on independence in Scotland. And I was like, they could use a good constitution, being an American and, being imbued with this. And
constitutions are very, very good ideas. But when you're dealing with a very ancient country, which you are with Scotland, you have a lot of work to do to excavate the things that have made us Scots, that are constitutional. The Duchas, the kinship system, relationship to the earth, responsibility to and for the earth and for each other, the compact between government and people, the civil rights that are inalienable, that are already there, the notion that you can't, that goes way back, needs to come back. All of those things are there in Scottish constitutional history, and they need to be really, truly need to be excavated and presented so that, and then brought into modern terms, so that we don't lose again. When we get a new constitution, we don't lose what has been taken from us once before. We need to get it back. We need to remember who we are and how we got to be who we are, and what we have to offer the world. Absolutely.
I didn't see the full question, but it had to do with recognition. And who because normally legally there has to, in order for Scotland to be an independent nation state, there needs to be recognition by other countries. And I would posit that there needs to be work done on that, and which we are doing somewhat in the SSRG, of where we've contacted people in contacts in Norway, also in Iceland, who have basically said that they would recognize Scotland if it was as long as it was as a legal, peaceful means of independence. But they have to understand.
Mark, I'm telling you, if Scotland did this and put its assemblies together and put the work together to show the international community that we were reconvening the constitutional arm of Scottish government that represented the people, because power in Scotland had the people who lent it and the government who borrowed it. And the Convention of the Estates began and essentially was supposed to be the brokers for the people that were lending power to government. Now, that was never got rid of, and the right to hold government to account means we have the right to a mechanism, an instrument, like the assembly of all the communities. And we did that, and we said, look here, international community, here's how Scotland evolved. Here's this branch of government that kind of went into abeyance at the time of the Treaty of Union. Here's how our rights have been violated, and we've decided we're going to withdraw from this very ugly marriage. The international community will just say, go for it, Scotland.
I know, and that's the message that you know, our colleagues in the SSRG have gotten when we've contacted other ones. I spoke with somebody from EFTA last year, and I asked him, would if Scotland became independent through a plebiscitary election in the May Holyrood elections, would you accept it? He's like, yeah, sure. You know, come on in. We'd love to have you. Basically, you know, I mean, there was some formalities, but all Scotland would have to do is send a letter to the EFTA Council, and they would say, sure. You know,
but
what? There's always this reticence.
Mark, I am absolutely betting that most of the rest of Europe, if the Scottish people got together and did that and say, look, we've reformed the Convention of the Estates. This is what makes it legal. This is how we've done it. This is how it's based on our old constitution. We're doing this. We've got this. We can show that we've got the support of the majority of Scots. I think they would cheer, because right now I can tell you the Westminster government is not terribly.
Oh no, they have never been lower in popularity. I don't know if you saw today meeting at NATO, and Boris Johnson would just people hate Boris Johnson. They can't stand him anymore. Especially, I mean, you know, and not only just the Europeans. I mean, the Americans hate him. You know, Biden hates him because he might screw up the Northern Irish Agreement, and he's a proud Irishman, you know, whose grandfather was brought over in a coffin ship to America. So, you know, they know what's going on. You know, they understand Scotland's position.
They do. Mark, listen, I have some very bad news here. My phone has just decided it's dying. So if I disappear,
okay. Well, we'll go as long as it goes, and if you have to say goodbye quickly, that's unfortunate. I was hoping to have a word with you, but I'll see you Sunday anyway. So we'll just go on as long as
let's keep going as long as we can. But it just, you know.
Okay. All right. So let's try to
new phone, because every so often it just decides it's going to start going bam 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 like that. So
okay.
Yeah,
so just to kind of resume, based on your research, you have concluded that the claim of right that was passed by the estates. Sorry, what of the estates? The
Convention of the Estates.
The Convention of the Estates, which was separate from
the communities of Scotland.
Okay, which was separate from the Parliament.
Yes.
And this was passed in 1689. The claim of right was passed in 1689, has never gone away, and was even reaffirmed in Westminster as recently as 20.
As a condition of the Union and the treaty.
Okay.
You don't get the Union, you don't get the treaty if you don't ratify Scotland's claim of right. And it's all constitutional lawyers will tell you that it's important to understand context and intent at the time that a treaty is entered into, just like a contract. And we know that observers at the time were remarked that Scotland was fine, didn't have anything to worry about, because the conditions of limitation of government and obedience would continue in Scotland. That was the intention at the time. That was the condition, and it is right there, and you can go and read it for yourself in the preamble to the Acts of Union, or the Acts of Ratification, as I prefer to call them.
And so the treaty of
it's the
ratification.
Mark, it's the prenup.
Yes.
Scotland had the sense to put in a prenup.
Okay, well, we need to get out the lawyers and get this divorce underway, man. I mean, you know, that's and so I think you're right. And as we at the just a disclaimer, Sarah and I are both members of the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group, and we're working on having a series of road shows coming, I believe, starting next month. And we will be doing events in different parts of Scotland, roughly 10. And then we were organizing a conference for the end of July, where we're going to try to get this joint jumping in terms of becoming independent. So we're working on it, and we will disclose more through an Independence Live. We'll be covering the road shows, and it will be a series of different topics each week. The first topic will be routes to independence, including Sarah's use of the claim of right. But there are 5 other. We've got 6 different legal routes to independence that we're proposing. So it's not just a Section 30 order that is the only route to independence.
Section 30 is going to take us nowhere. We all know that.
Yeah.
But if there was one thing I could say to people, it's remember that sovereignty you. Sovereignty is in, it's every single one of us and all of us together. And when we do all come together and put everything else aside and say we're going to stand for Scotland ourselves, we are the authority, we are the sovereignty in Scotland. We're going to move together. We're going to create the kind of Scotland and the kind of government that will be a beacon to the whole world. Look out, world. Look out, Westminster, because you will not stop the Scots when they unite. You do not stop us.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that on that inspiring note, I guess we'll turn we'll stop the show and we can speak for a few minutes after. But so thank you everybody, and thank you Sarah for your inspiring words. And we're gonna move forward with our project and try to get this try to get the Scottish people united around a different means to achieve independence that is perfectly legal, and if it's well explained to the international community, they'll say fine. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. But many countries don't even understand the constitutional position that Scotland's in. They just figure they're like a region of England or something like that, or a county or something like that, rather than in a very, very dysfunctional marriage that they have the absolute right to withdraw from.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching this evening, and I shall see you next week.